Australia's new nature laws are being sold as a win for the environment, but there is a deep, uneasy feeling that something much bigger and more dangerous is unfolding beneath the surface. The other day, around lunchtime, a biodiversity campaigner texted a simple question: "So, are you happy or disappointed?" The honest answer is complicated. The Australian Parliament is in the middle of changing the country's environmental laws, and the final shape of these reforms carries both genuine relief and serious alarm. What just changed? After intense negotiations, particularly pushed by the Greens, the government's original plan has been watered down in one crucial way: the revised laws will not allow coal and gas projects to be rushed through a special fast-track process the government initially wanted. On top of that, decisions about coal and gas mines that could damage water resources will stay with the federal government instead of being handed entirely to the states, as was first proposed. On paper, that is a huge relief for people who care about rivers, aquifers, and groundwater-dependent ecosystems. It means there will still be a national check on some of the most environmentally risky fossil fuel projects. For a brief moment, that feels like good news. Why the relief comes with dread. And yet, that feeling of relief is tangled with a strong sense of dread. The original bill, introduced only weeks earlier, would have pushed Australia backwards on environmental protection rather than forwards. It was drafted in a way that would have sidelined community voices, shifted key decisions about environmental damage to state and territory governments, and handed the federal environment minister broad powers to tweak or dilute protections for particular projects, companies, or sectors. From the outset, the message from government was clear: making things easy for business was the priority, even if that meant more quick yeses that put nature at risk. The rhetoric of speed and efficiency might sound modern and pragmatic, but in practice it often translates into fewer safeguards, less scrutiny, and more damage to the places people love. But here's where it gets controversial: can a system built on shortcuts ever truly protect the environment? The push for speed and abundance. The government has signaled that it wants to fast-track approvals not just for some fossil fuel projects, but especially for large renewable energy developments and new mineral mines. Politicians and industry advocates are talking excitedly about a future of abundance created by this wave of projects. That word sounds positive, but it raises a serious warning sign. In practice, abundance is often used as code for clearing forests, draining wetlands, cutting into woodlands, and displacing local communities if they happen to be in the way of big projects. And this is the part most people miss: if the transition to clean energy simply repeats the old pattern of bulldozing nature and ignoring communities, it risks creating a new kind of environmental crisis even as it tries to solve the climate one. Why haste is so dangerous? The Environment Minister insists that Australia can speed up approvals and still protect nature. That sounds reassuring, but 25 years of experience with environmental regulation tell a different story: when governments move too fast, unintended consequences follow. Rushed decisions anger communities who feel shut out, ignored, or sacrificed for someone else's profit. They also cause losses to landscapes, species, and cultural places that people grieve for generations, because once a forest is cleared or a wetland is drained, it is extraordinarily hard to bring back. In the long run, this does not create true abundance. It strips away the healthy ecosystems that actually underpin a thriving society and economy. The myth of endless nature on tap. At the heart of this debate is a simple truth: there is no real abundance without reciprocity. If Australia keeps treating nature as if it were an inexhaustible magic pudding that can be sliced again and again without ever running out, the country will learn, painfully, that this is a fantasy. Healthy rivers, forests, reefs, and grasslands are not optional extras; they are the life support systems that make human prosperity possible. When they are pushed beyond their limits, the losses show up as collapsing fisheries, failing crops, destroyed homes, and cultural devastation. The bill's direction suggests Australia is still dangerously close to believing that nature will always bounce back, no matter how hard it is pushed. The climate blind spot. One genuinely positive outcome is that coal and gas mining will not be put on an accelerated approval track, and that is something to celebrate. Yet the government has stubbornly refused to embed any explicit requirement to consider greenhouse gas emissions or the impacts of climate change on Australia's natural heritage in these environmental decisions. This omission is staggering when set against Australia's first national climate risk assessment, released only a few months ago. That assessment laid out a grim picture. If global warming passes the temperature limits set by the Paris Agreement, Australia's marine, freshwater and land-based ecosystems could face widespread collapse and extinctions across the continent. It warned of entire ecosystems failing and species disappearing altogether. Legal and moral obligations. There is only one way to prevent that level of warming: rapidly stop the pollution produced by burning coal, gas and oil for energy. An advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice has also affirmed that all countries have a legal duty to prevent climate harm and safeguard the global climate system. For Australia, that obligation does not stop at domestic emissions. It also means confronting the pollution created when countries overseas burn Australian fossil fuel exports, because those exported emissions contribute to the same global climate risks that are already hitting Australian communities and ecosystems. Ignoring that link does not make the problem disappear. Pollution that refuses to be ignored. The greenhouse gas emissions from Australia's exported energy will not vanish just because a minister chooses not to count them, or because a prime minister finds the topic politically uncomfortable. Those emissions are already feeding the fires, floods, heatwaves and ecosystem damage that Australians are living through now. The consequences of today's choices will reach far into the future, affecting generations long after the current group of politicians has left the stage. At the same time, community demands for action will grow louder as the effects of climate change become more intense and more personal, making this political avoidance increasingly untenable. Who is raising the alarm? These concerns are not coming from nowhere. They are being voiced by people with long experience in environmental advocacy and research, including Georgina Woods, who leads research and investigations for Lock the Gate Alliance. Groups like hers have spent years tracking the impacts of mining, water extraction and climate change on communities and landscapes across Australia. Their perspective is shaped by real-world examples of what happens when environmental protections are weakened and decisions are made in the interests of short-term profit instead of long-term well-being. Agree or disagree with their stance, their warnings deserve serious attention rather than dismissal. Your turn: hope, fear, or both. So where does this leave Australia? On the brink of a smarter, cleaner future, or at risk of repeating the same mistakes under a greener brand? Is the refusal to seriously factor climate damage into nature laws a pragmatic compromise, or a historic failure that future generations will condemn? Do you feel more relieved that some of the worst proposals were stopped, or more alarmed that climate impacts and exported pollution are still being treated as someone else's problem? Should Australia be allowed to expand fossil fuel exports while claiming to lead on climate and nature protection, or is that a contradiction that cannot be squared? Share where you stand. Does this new direction give you hope, fear, or an uncomfortable mix of both?